Have you ever heard of a queen who took the throne at just 6 years old, married to a man almost 5 times her age, widowed at 10, and gone from this world before she even turned 20? This isn't a dark fairy tale or a fictional drama. This is the tragic, true story of Isabella of Valois, England's forgotten child queen, whose life was a pawn in a game played by kings. Let's rewind to the late 14th century. Europe is a continent on fire, torn apart by the relentless 100 Years' War between England and France. For decades, the two kingdoms have been locked in a brutal struggle, spilling blood and emptying treasuries. But by the 1390s, both sides were exhausted. They desperately needed a break, a moment of peace. And in an age where royal marriages were the ultimate political contracts, a wedding was seen as the strongest seal for a treaty. This is where our story begins. In 1396, a momentous decision was made. Richard II, the King of England, a man of 29, was to marry a French princess. But who would be his bride? The choice fell upon Princess Isabella of Valois. The only catch? She was just 6 years old, a mere child. Can you imagine that? A little girl, barely old enough to read, being chosen to unite two warring nations. The wedding ceremony itself was a spectacle of unimaginable grandeur. It was designed to dazzle, to show the world that this alliance was real. Picture lavish feasts, rivers of wine, glittering jewels, and courtiers dressed in their finest silks. For France, this tiny princess was a living symbol of peace, a promise to end the bloodshed. For England, she was tangible proof of a powerful new alliance. But what was she to herself? To little Isabella, this grand ceremony was the end of her childhood. Richard, too, to his credit, seemed to understand the delicacy of the situation. He treated his child bride with kindness and respect, more like a daughter than a wife. He promised her concerned family that he would wait until she was of a proper age before their marriage was truly consummated. He even played games with her and doted on her like a cherished doll. But don't let this paint a picture of a happy life. Isabella was torn from her home, her family, and everything she had ever known. She was taken to a foreign court, a bewildering world of unfamiliar faces, strict etiquette, and a language she could barely understand. She was surrounded by strangers who saw her not as a little girl, but as a political asset. Yes, she wore the crown and was called the Queen of England. But in reality, she was a prisoner in a magnificent golden cage. Think about it. A little girl in royal silks, too young to grasp the complex web of politics, carrying the immense weight of peace between two nations on her tiny shoulders. What a terrifying and lonely existence that must have been. For a few short years, this fragile peace held. Isabella grew accustomed to her role, learning English and performing her ceremonial duties. But her gilded world was built on shifting sands. In 1399, just 3 years after her marriage, disaster struck. Richard II's reign, which had become increasingly unpopular and tyrannical, came to a violent end. His own cousin, Henry Bolingbroke, returned from exile, raised an army, and seized the throne. Richard was overthrown, imprisoned in Pontefract Castle, and soon died under deeply mysterious circumstances. The official story was that he starved himself to death out of grief, but few believed it. It's widely suspected he was murdered to secure the new king's claim. And with Richard's death, Isabella's world completely shattered. At just 10 years old, she was suddenly a widow. Her husband was dead, her crown was stolen, and her entire future was thrown into chaos. The new king, now Henry IV, had a problem. What was he to do with the young, widowed queen? Isabella was still a valuable piece on the political chessboard. Henry IV had a brilliant and ruthless idea. He proposed that Isabella marry his own son and heir, the young Henry of Monmouth, the very same boy who would later become the legendary King Henry V, the hero of Agincourt. For Henry IV, this marriage would legitimize his new dynasty and maintain the fragile peace with France. But here's where Isabella's story takes a remarkable turn. This 10-year-old girl, who had been manipulated and controlled her entire life, did something extraordinary. She refused vehemently. Despite her age, despite her powerless position, she showed incredible courage and a will of iron. She was loyal to her deceased husband, Richard, and she rejected the idea of being used as a pawn by the man who had usurped his throne. Her defiance was shocking to the English court. How could this child dare to defy the new king? Her refusal came at a great cost. Henry IV, furious at her obstinacy, placed her under what was essentially house arrest. She was moved from castle to castle, kept under guard. Her French attendants were dismissed, and her name was slowly erased from the official court records. She was a queen in name only, a ghost haunting the corridors of power. Finally, after years of this strange captivity and political wrangling, Henry IV gave up. Isabella was eventually allowed to return to France. But she didn't return as a triumphant queen. She returned as a child widow, a teenager marked by tragedy and humiliation. The symbol of peace had become a symbol of a failed treaty. Back in France, her father, King Charles VI, wasted no time in arranging another political marriage for her. This time, her groom was Charles, the Duke of Orleans, a cousin who was much closer to her in age. For a brief, fleeting moment, it seemed that Isabella might finally have a chance at a normal life, a life with love and happiness. She and Charles seemed to genuinely care for each other. But fate, it seems, was not finished with its cruelty. In 1409, at the age of only 19, Isabella gave birth to her first child, a daughter named Joan. The joy of motherhood was short-lived. Complications from the birth proved fatal. Isabella of Valois, the woman who was once the Queen of England, the jewel paraded before nations as a beacon of peace, died just days later. She was buried quietly in France, her story quickly fading into the footnotes of history. A queen at 6, a widow at 10, and dead at 19. Isabella never got to choose her own path. Her life was traded, planned, and ultimately sacrificed on the grand chessboard of medieval politics. Her story isn't one of power or glory or grand achievements. It's a quiet, heartbreaking story of innocence stolen, of a life cut tragically short by the ambition of powerful men. For every famous king or warrior we remember from history are countless women like Isabella women who were silenced, sacrificed, and forgotten. Their lives were the currency of diplomacy, their futures determined by treaties and alliances. But today we remember Isabella of Valois. We pull her story from the shadows and give voice to the little girl who was forced to become a queen. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as compelling as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more hidden histories. Let me know in the comments what you think about Isabella's incredible and tragic life. See you next time.